Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Samantha Sayer. I'm Partner Marketing Manager at JFrog. Just a few notes about the webinar today. All the participants are on mute. We are recording this webinar session, and we're going to make this recording available to you all. Even though you are on mute, we would still like to hear from you in terms of any questions you may have, and you can use the questions tab, I believe, at the bottom of your screen where the Zoom information is. We'd certainly like to hear from you, and we'll get to those questions towards the end of the webinar, given we have enough time. We just want to be able to give you an overview of the integration between Sumo Logic and JFrog Artifactory. And I'm happy to say that I've got two speakers with me today, both senior solution engineers. Mark Galpin is from JFrog. Yowei Bourne is from Sumo Logic. And in terms of how the webinar is going to flow, Mark will start us off with an introduction to Artifactory. He'll then hand that over to Yowei to give us an overview of Sumo Logic. Together, Mark and Yowei will give us a demonstration of the integration itself through some key customer use cases in terms of discussion points. And then towards the end, we'll get to all the questions that you guys have been submitting, so please feel free to submit those as the webinar continues. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Samantha. Again, my name is Mark Galpin. I am a senior solution architect with JFrog. And since it seems like a number of you may not be familiar with Artifactory, I just wanted to talk a quick bit about what Artifactory is all about. So we're a universal repository, which means that basically we cover all of these technologies in the DevOps world. But really, I think the important thing about Artifactory, especially when we're talking about the context of this collaboration between Artifactory and Sumo Logic, is that Artifactory functions as a system of record for your CI/CD environment. And so what that means and where that starts with is the general CI/CD workflow. And of course, the CI/CD workflow always starts with awesome developers writing awesome code. And we believe and want that those awesome developers are going to be writing their awesome code on the tool of their choice, using the package managers of their choice. And maybe they're going to be declaring new dependencies, maybe not. But from their desk, they can resolve dependencies through JFrog Artifactory. And this will work really great for them because JFrog Artifactory, one of the things it does is it acts as a proxy for the web, so they aren't going to have to keep going out to the World Wide Web to download their binaries. And if they need a binary that nobody's asked for before, it'll just go out to the web and download it, and then future developers will have it very fast at land speed. So once the developer has worked on their code and gotten it to a functional level, they're going to be committing it to a source repository. There's not a lot to say about source repositories in 2016. Hopefully you love them. Even if you hate them, you probably still use them. And it moves straight into CI. And so your CI servers, we're compatible with lots and lots of different CI servers like Jenkins and Travis and Bamboo and TeamCity and TSS, or et cetera, et cetera. Your CI servers are going to be taking these commits from your environment, and they're going to be building off of them. And they're going to be building with the exact same tools that the developer used at their desk. And one of the great points of JFrog is that compatibility with all of the tool systems. That's what that universal really means, is compatibility with all of the tools you might need. But of course, now that you're building in a controlled environment, while you're still resolving dependencies from Artifactory, getting them very, very fast, you don't have to worry about maintaining extensive caches right there on the Jenkins server, because Artifactory will be right next to it dealing with those things. You're also able to now build for record and deploy what you built out to Artifactory. And the JFrog Artifactory is also going to be using its integration with these CI servers to get what we call our build information, bill of materials, to store information about that build that can only be captured at runtime. And once you've done a build for record, now this is where really the artifact lifecycle really starts. You know, from the developer's perspective, he probably feels like he's done. But in the modern DevOps world, we know that there's a lot more that goes on after that build. You know, we know that we have to do QA, we have to go through a promotion, we have to go through a general maturation phase. This maturation phase may include things like security checks and architecture analysis using JFrog X-Ray. You know, in general, the artifact has to get from I have built it to I am confident that it's ready to be given to customers and used in production. And once that final release confidence is established via the acquisition of a great deal of metadata, once that confidence is established, then you're ready to do something with it. And that may be deploying it to production servers in-house. This is where the majority of the world's software goes, is to some sort of in-house production server. Or maybe you want to roll it out to customers in some way, or roll it out for distribution worldwide using a tool like JFrog bin tray. And the JFrog platform sits at the center of this entire process. And one of the key values we see in you know, combining with Sumo Logic is that if you are a system that sits in the center of this entire process, you inevitably know a lot about what's going on inside the system. And what we're really excited about with the partnership with Sumo Logic is that Sumo Logic can take that information that Artifactory kind of intrinsically knows from the business done on Artifactory and really bring it to the next level of visualization and analysis. And so with that, I'm going to let Yohei talk a little bit about Sumo Logic.
Okay, so my name is Yohei Born, Solution Engineer with Sumo Logic, and I'm going to talk about a little bit the basics of Sumo Logic, and then of course the application that we built for JFrog Artifactory. So Sumo Logic is a log analytics platform as a service. We're 100% built in the cloud. And what we do essentially is collect log data from all of your systems, applications, network devices, and so on, put it in one place, index it, and give you the ability to search and analyze using a number of tools, which include things like machine learning and so on. The slide that I have up right now, the high-level deployment diagram, this is just to illustrate at a high level the ways or the locations from which we can collect data. And this really just illustrates that we can collect from both on-premise and cloud sources, which in this case is very much relevant to Artifactory because you have your Artifactory on-prem and then you have your Artifactory online, and we're able to collect from both of those. Now, once you've collected that data, you can now take advantage of the analytics tools that we provide. The first of which I'm showing here, highlighting here, is LogReduce, and this is our patented machine learning technology that allows our system to recognize patterns in your data, and this is something that dramatically decreases the time that it takes to build out queries and to also understand and gain insights from what's happening in your environment. On the next slide here, that LogReduce actually feeds into our ability to perform anomaly detection. So again, applying machine learning, getting the machine to do that sort of initial 80% of the work and surface the interesting insights to you. Outlier detection, similar to anomaly detection, but more specific to metrics and statistics. And then, of course, predictive analytics, right? You want to be able to actually come up with, some course of action based on what the data is telling you.
Yohei has some really exciting stuff to show us, but before we get there, I actually have a really cool announcement. If you're a customer of JFrog's, you may have seen in your email that that we released 4.10.0 yesterday. And if you are on our Artifactory Online platform, then you got upgraded last night. And with that upgrade, we actually now have a built-in integration with Sumo Logic. And so I just wanted to quickly show how you can make use of this built-in integration before we jump into what you're actually going to see once you get it. And so, first of all, you may have noticed that we just modified the UI ever so slightly so that on the admin you can now filter. So I'm going to filter for log, and you're going to see that log analytics is one of the options. This is my Artifactory Online that we're on right now. And now I'm going to enable log analytics. I'm going to create a new connection. And I'm going to click Access Dashboard. And it's going to ask me to allow it to pop up windows. And it's going to automatically sign me up for Sumo with my email account. I'm going to say yes, I want to do that. It's going to authorize me onto the Sumo Logic platform. It's going to communicate with my Artifactory Online. It does this also with an on-premises Artifactory as well. So this works with both platforms. And now it's going to start populating my dashboard. And it's going to, start bringing up the dashboards here. This will take a little bit of time to bring up, but Sumo Logic is getting the 3 main logs of Artifactory. That is our request log, which has the traffic in and out of Artifactory, our access log, which is the security audit log, and our Artifactory log, which is the console log. And now Yoei has one that's been a bit busier than my personal Artifactory Online that he's going to show us what that really gives for us.
Okay, so this is the Sumo Logic application for Artifactory, and as Mark mentioned, we are using a demo environment here with some more active demo data. So I've got this pre-populated. So I'm just going to quickly walk through what we built out in the dashboards here. The first one is the Artifactory overview, and you can see up top we are tracking the traffic to our repository, both download and upload traffic. And from here, I can actually click on one of these links, and this will take me to a drill down dashboard. It's going to show me a little bit more information about my traffic. So up top, just going left to right, we can see overall traffic, download traffic, upload traffic, and that's by geolocation. So the request and access logs contain IP addresses which we're able to map to lat long coordinates using a geomapping database, and that's how we're able to generate these maps. In the second row, we're showing just kind of other ways of slicing and dicing that data. We're looking at overall data upload and download, same data upload and download, but trended over the last 24 hours, and then further grouped by IP addresses, active repos, by actions, and by IP address, top referred files, and then also most active locations. All right. Now, if I go back to my overview dashboard, a little further down here, I have another section for request analytics. And you can see here, I'm showing a trend of requests by status code over time. And again, I can click on this, and it takes me into a drill down dashboard showing details on request and access. So I see once again that trend of status codes over time. And then also I'm calling out specifically my 500 errors because those are server errors and tend to be fairly critical. So we can actually analyze that data as well. And then further down here, we can see additional information such as requests by repo, uploads by repo, non-anonymous access, failed login attempts, and accepted login attempts. And then if we go back to our overview dashboard once again, just a couple other panels I wanted to call out here. We also have some analytics on the cache performance, accepted deploys, downloads, incomplete downloads, and so on. And then one that is particularly useful over here is the cache hit ratio, which is showing us the performance of our cache in the repo. Right, and that's yeah. So that's essentially it. So Mark, do you have any specific questions about the application that we've built for you guys?
Yeah, no, this is really cool, Yoei, and I hope our customers find it as cool as I do. I am going to bring up some questions that I think are of particular interest to our customers, and I really wanted to approach these questions when I was thinking about it from 2 viewpoints that I think are important to our customers. So the first viewpoint is I have a DevOps admin who owns an Artifactory server, and obviously a lot of his job is to make his DevOps environment go smoothly and keep it up and running. And so I wanted to ask some questions kind of from the perspective of how Sumo can help him do that. And then a little bit later, I want to ask some questions from another major concern of any DevOps admin. I know it's certainly a major concern of mine sometimes, is how do I show my boss that good things are happening with the systems under my control, and what are some good metrics that can be used by management to track the DevOps environment and what the team is up to.
Okay, great.
So the first question is a fairly simple one, but pretty important. A lot of our customers, they have worldwide architectures of Artifactory servers. And one of the things that happens when you have a worldwide architecture is that you always want your CI environments to be pointing to their nearest Artifactory server. So I think that the system that you have data for is a system in the United States, and hypothetically, a customer might also have an Artifactory in, say, the EU somewhere. And one of the questions they might be asking is, they don't want their CI systems in the EU accessing an Artifactory in the United States. They want their CI systems that are not in the United States to be accessing their system in the EU. And so can you show me, how I might determine if, first of all, I have any systems that are accessing the wrong Artifactory, and then from that Artifactory, how could I know that?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question for the data set that we have here. So what I'm going to do here is, from the traffic dashboard, I'm actually going to drill down into the overall traffic. And as you pointed out, this is a single repo in the United States. So we can already immediately see here that there is a less than optimal configuration, because we got 62,000 overall traffic coming from the United States, which is what we would expect. But we also have some requests coming from the Middle East as well as Asia. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this show and search, and this takes me into the search interface where I can further manipulate the query to get some additional insight. So, you're particularly interested in requests coming from outside the United States. So what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to add a field which contains the country name. And this is, of course, as I mentioned before, from that GeoLookup database. And then I'm going to do a simple where clause where I'm going to look for anything that is not United States. So let's run this and see what it comes up with. So immediately you can see the map populating, and you can see that there are no hits within the United States. And then from here, I can actually go into my table view to see specifically what those countries are. So Colombia, Japan, United Kingdom, Egypt, China, and so on.
And that's cool, because now I have IP addresses of specific offending servers in other places in the world, and I can probably use that to reach out to the owners of those CI servers and say, hey, you probably need to work on your build configuration and not be pointing straight at my US server. Maybe you should try pointing at my cool new server in EMEA. So that's the first question we had. But so that deals with optimization. Let's talk about the much sadder case, which is while Artifactory is a super reliable service, sometimes things go wrong. And I did see when you were showing the dashboard that we had this big red box talking about 500 errors. And I want to take a note here, by the way, to say that before we rolled out this partnership for our customers, JFrog started using Sumo Logic in-house to help monitor Artifactory Online. And 500 errors for Artifactory Online customers, they're very rare, but they're something that we pay a lot of careful attention to. So I did see that we have 500 errors, and this typically indicates some sort of infrastructure type scenario inside Artifactory itself and the Artifactory infrastructure. Can you maybe show us a little bit more how we can drive down and hopefully figure out what the corrective action we need to take with these 500 errors is? Yeah,
absolutely. So as you pointed out, this is the panel over here in red, and it's showing me essentially 70 500 class errors in the last 24 hours. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this panel, and you can do that with any panel that you want to drill down into. And so again, it takes me into the search interface, it reruns the query, and then what I can do is I can go into the messages, okay, so there's two tabs there, right? There's the aggregate, which is going to show the aggregates, of course, and then there's the messages, which shows the raw messages underlying that particular query. And then we can see over here the actual messages, okay, so we got some 500s, 503s, 501s. Let's say I'm interested in getting some context around this 501. What I can do now is make use of my category, and category, by the way, is a piece of metadata that we use to organize the different logs that come in. And so this is coming from the request log, so I'm just going to hit the surrounding messages plus or minus 1 minute. Okay, this is now going to show the context around that 501, but it's only going to be in the request log, so you can see highlighted in blue there. Now, if I want to look at other logs as well to get further context, I can simply put a wildcard right here, hit enter. This is going to rerun the same query in the same time range, but is now going to include, we can see here my traffic logs, of course, and if I keep scrolling through here, you'll also see the Artifactory logs as well. Right, so there's some examples right there of info messages coming from the Artifactory log. So this gives you complete context around that particular server error and should make it a lot easier to investigate. Yeah, and I think that should be, you know, quite sufficient. I mean, if I have the request log that's showing me, hey, I got this 500 error, and then I can parse that to the exact same time slice in the Artifactory log, typically that's going to be very helpful in figuring out what went wrong and being able to address that error. So another common thing that happens as customers are maintaining their overall CI/CD environment is that credentials have to rotate. You know, maybe you have a policy that says that when certain employees leave the company, all of the API keys for the CI environment, which they had access to, have to be changed. For example. And so when this happens, inevitably in my experience, you know, you go and revoke all the credentials that employee had access to, and you go through this big effort to try to fix everything so that it has the new credential, and inevitably you miss some. And so I was wondering if you could kind of give me some idea of how I could see that. So this would normally be a 403 response that says that a lot of people are logging in with credentials that are invalid. And can you kind of show me how could I find, you know, CI servers that maybe I missed when I was trying to do my credential update? Yeah, absolutely. So in the request and access dashboard, you can see in the upper left, we have a trend graph showing the status codes. And one of those status codes is actually that 403 that you mentioned. So let's click on this. And okay, we're in the search. Okay, so I'm going to do something similar to what I did earlier with the map, which is I am going to insert a where clause, and then this time I'm looking for 403s. Okay, so let's do this first. Let's see what the graph shows us. This will give us a high level. Okay, so we're getting quite a number of 403s. So there was a spike earlier in the day, and then we got a few happening right now. So what I'm going to do now is go into the raw messages. Okay, so you'll notice here these are just the 403s because I put that where clause in there. And then I'm just going to pick the first one, and I'm going to do just like I did before with the surrounding messages. And then I'm also going to change the scope to all of the Artifactory logs. So let's run this. And now we'll see, there it is, okay? So we can see here's our HTTP error code 403, and this is coming from the Artifactory log. So this actually took us from the request 403 and the access 403, which is up here, the denied deploy, into the actual warning message coming from the application.
Excellent. And so, you know, with that information, I can go through, I can see specific users that are having problems and specific IP addresses that it's coming from, and hopefully go out and modify that CI system's credentials to meet the new credential. So this was a whole bunch of, as I said, technically actionable questions that we just addressed. But as I said, there are other things that you want to use analytics for and calculate metrics on the general system. One of the big things that happens with a tool like Artifactory as companies undergo their DevOps transformation, Artifactory is one of the big pieces of that DevOps transformation. But the other big aspect of it, it's not just a matter of tools, it's also an organizational aspect where often companies are trying to more centralize their DevOps management. And Artifactory and Sumo Logic can be key aspects of that. But one of the things that we often get asked about is, okay, I'm a team that's providing DevOps services, including Artifactory, out to an entire large sector of a company. Maybe I want to have some idea of who's using me for what, and maybe even be talking about chargebacks or things like that to other teams in the organization. And so in order to do that, of course, inside Artifactory, it's pretty easy to see the storage usage that people might have in individual repositories. But, that's really just giving me a historical view of how much data have they accumulated over time. What I may really want to know is how much are they using the server right now today. So can you show me a little bit about how I could know how much the server is actually being used right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, on the request and access dashboard, actually down in the second row, we have a couple panels that are interesting in this regard. The first of which is request by repo, and this is actually showing the number of requests, actually both deploys and downloads for a given repo. So we actually have that broken down. You can see here, I got milestone, I have libs release local, I have libs release JSON or cache, and so on. And then this I can actually view in other ways as well. So I can actually break this down by individual files if I'm interested in doing that, or the group ID, of course. But what you see here is the repo. And then the one on the right, obviously, is just the upload data.
Excellent. And so this can be a really great, this is a live view of how is my server actually being used and who is using it, what teams are releasing right now, what is the overall traffic. And those numbers can actually be, really impressive. I know that, whenever we hear, some of our bigger customers come to us with those numbers, it can be really exciting. And I'm sure that it also is really exciting to the people they have to report to be able to say, hey, here's the top 10 teams and how much they're using our tool. And that kind of brings up the other point of the usage is growing. I'm going to have to potentially, if I am the owner of a project that owns an Artifactory, I have to worry about hardware allocations, budget allocations for hardware as the usage keeps going up. Can you show me a little bit about how I might see a trend on the total data transfer over time and what that might mean for the system? Yeah, absolutely.
So on the overview dashboard, you'll see in the second row, there is a graph for data transfer in gigabytes over time. So this is a high level, it's really only grouped by upload and download, but you can see how the actual transfer rate changes over time. So if there was a, growing demand for, this particular or many repos in this Artifactory instance, you would see that grow here. Now, I can actually take this another step further because of the richness of the data, and I can actually look at repo trends grouped by the individual modules themselves. And so you can see here, for example, this is my repro trends dashboard, and this is showing uploads and downloads. And the colors in the bars actually represent those different repositories. All right, so I can see at a very granular level which ones are trending upwards, which ones are trending downwards, and so on. And you can even see down below, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but this is the individual files themselves. And if you wanted to, you can actually use the dashboard filter mechanism to look at specific files.
Now, all of these, of course, are 24-hour time periods. If I'm an administrator looking for it, I probably want a much longer time frame. Is that something that's configurable in the panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see up here, there's actually a time selector. So these are, again, looking at 24 hours, as you pointed out, but you can, of course, extend these out to 3 days, 7 days, and so on.
Yeah. So, obviously, parsing all this data for a month would take a little bit long. I don't think people really want to sit here and wait while we do that. Mm-hmm. But if I could do that, and I have a month's worth of data, then I'm starting to see a real trend and I saw that there was a previous month and this month, and I can start comparing those. And that's giving me a real trend of where my usage is going. What do I need to plan for the next quarter or the next year?
Yep.
So the final big thing, of course, everybody wants to talk about the security of their servers. Many Artifactories are deep inside company firewalls, but there are many Artifactories that are not, that are out in the DMZs, or maybe they're an Artifactory online or out in the cloud or whatever. And one of the things that people are going to want to know is the server under attack? And of course, one of the easy identifications that a server might be under attack is if you're getting a lot of access denied login attempts from locations that are not inside your own company. We talked a little bit about locations inside the company, but if you're getting a lot of access denied on the same user or from the same location, that could be an indicator. So
yeah, definitely. So on the request and access dashboard, at the very bottom, you'll see a few panels that are relevant to this. Over on the left, we have non-anonymous access. That is, going to indicate that it's actual user activity. In the middle panel, we have denied login attempts. So that's actually going to show you how many times a login actually failed for a given user, for a given IP address. And this one, of course, is fairly general. It's really just showing you all the denied login attempts with IP and user. But as I showed you before, you can modify these, right? You can actually run the query in the search, and you can narrow down to an individual user. I mean, if you look at the user Nitin here, for example, he's coming from 4 different IP addresses, right? So that might be something interesting to look into. And then, of course, we also track the accepted login attempts, but those are probably not going to be terribly interesting unless you have a spike in denied login attempts.
Okay. Well, this is a lot of really cool stuff, and I have been seeing that there's been some traffic in the chat on the questions. So rather than me keeping and asking you questions, let's actually look at some real questions that we're getting from the attendees of today's webinar. And it looks like the first question was somebody wanted to just see again real quick how they could get to the log analytics from Artifactory.
Okay.
So again, I logged into my Artifactory online. Now over here on the left-hand side, we have the 4 tabs. Out on the admin tab, now again, you do need to be doing Artifactory 4.10 or an Artifactory and Beyond or Artifactory Online. So if you have not upgraded your on-premises Artifactory since yesterday, you won't have this option. But if you go out to your Artifactory Online, it will be there. At least if it's on the standard upgrade schedule. And then you can see all the different options. I can type in log in the filter menu, and then it will highlight the ones related to logs. And you can see under advanced, I have log analytics and the system logs. And so if I jump to log analytics, this brings me to the Sumo page. Allows me to create the new connection. Now that I've done that once, it's got the existing connection, and then I would just click Access Dashboard, and it's going to bring me out to my Sumo Logic dashboard.
So the next question I saw here was from Parm Migata. How do I upload the Tomcat logs every day to Sumo Logic and run dashboards? Yeah, so this is a really simple one. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so back in the main window, you simply go to Manage and Collection, or you can use the Setup Wizard if you like, and then you go to Setup Streaming Data, and then you'll see over here Apache Tomcat, and you just click on that. And you can use, if you already have a collector installed, you can use an existing one, and it's simply going to add the log sources to collect the appropriate data. Or you do a new collector, and it's going to ask you to select the operating system, and that's going to let you download the collector. Then you just need to copy it over to that machine, run it, and then it'll start collecting. Alternatively, if you're using some sort of deployment automation like Chef or Puppet, you could configure a recipe or cookbook to do that for you in bulk.
And of course, with the Artifactory Online, this all happens automatically. It's all pre-built into the integration.
Yep. Very nice.
It should be, this is one of the really exciting things about this integration, is to have kind of that collection sort of built in.
Yep.
to communicate. Another question I'm seeing is, you very briefly mentioned cache hits. Could you kind of show us again how I can monitor the cache ratio? Because obviously one of the questions people often have is cache tuning. Caches can use up a lot of disk space. So that cache hit ratio maybe gives me a good idea of, whether my caches are tuned correctly for optimal value between, the disk usage versus, what I'm getting in network performance out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm showing here is the cache hit ratio panel. So I display this as a table. I just found that, this sort of shows best in this format because you can look at both the deploys, the downloads by repo, and then of course the ratio. So the calculation here, fairly straightforward. It's right there. I've highlighted it. These numbers are gonna vary, right? I mean, it really depends on what that repo is being used for, and I'm sure Artifactory folks would know better. But you can see here, for example, a lot of our repos in this demo data environment are around the 50% mark, a little bit higher, right? So again, I'm not totally familiar with the data.
Yeah, I mean that's actually pretty unusual. This means that these caches are, which is kind of indicative of how we generated the data, pretty virginal, as it were, so that the cache had to be repopulated. And so what you're seeing here is basically people downloading the data the first time and then downloading it one or two more times after that as they're doing builds against it. But if this was a longer-term data set and a longer-term server, you would be seeing these cache hit ratios ever increasing on a lot of these sorts of repos, historically speaking.
Yeah, which is what I would expect. Typically, better cache performance is going to be higher ratios. And of course, you can also, with Sumo Logic, set up notifications for these. So, let's say, optimal ratios are closer to 90% or 95% or whatever. What you can actually do in Sumo Logic is you can save this search and you can go to schedule this search and you can actually set up a notification. So I could have this run, for example, in real time. And then, I choose my time range for the search. I could have it, use the last 5 minutes or whatever. And then over here, you want to set up the condition, right? So my query would look for things under 90%, and then I could say when there's more than 0 of these, right? If any of my repos is underperforming, go ahead and send me an email, right? And then we have other alert types as well. Like you can execute a script, you can use a webhook, which can, essentially kick off something in another cloud service like a PagerDuty or something like that.
Yeah, no, I know that our support team, we talked earlier about the 500 alerts. I know our support team has an alert that sends text messages to the duty cell phone whenever a 500 goes off on Artifactory Online.
Yep.
So, we're very familiar with these alerts, and they're super cool and useful. Although I suppose there may be people on the support team who may object to the super cool part. But we all want to help our customers out and find these things out as quickly as possible.
Yep.
One final question that we might have that I'm seeing one person asked is there a way with this dashboard that you can aggregate more than one Artifactory server?
Yeah, absolutely. So the dashboards here, as you pointed out earlier, is just for one repo in the United States. We can, of course, modify the scope at the very top of these queries to aggregate data across multiple Artifactory instances, and that's both for on-premise and for Artifactory Online as well. The Sumo Logic applications, all of them are completely customizable. You can really think of them as starting templates. And so once you install the application, which you can do from up here, you go to the library and then you go into apps and then you find the app you want. This is Artifactory, obviously. You go here and you click install. When you click install, you'll see here that there is a metadata selection, which is source category. So when you're collecting your data, earlier we talked about the setup wizard and installing collectors and so on. One of the options is setting up source category. So you want to have a source category schema that allows you to select individual Artifactories as well as all of the Artifactories. So you might have, the schema might be Artifactory/US, Artifactory/EU, or whatever. In which case, if you wanted to have that aggregate view, you just put in Artifactory/star for this value, and that's going to give you the aggregate. And then if you want the individual dashboards, you just be more specific, Artifactory/US, and so on.
Excellent. We're starting to get towards the end of our time. I think Samantha had some final notes she wanted to bring up on all of this. So I guess we should pass back off to her so that she can bring up any final notes she had.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It was really just a note to say that it seemed like the majority of folks here today are familiar with Sumo Logic. If you don't already have an Artifactory account or a trial account, one way to really see this integration firsthand is to go ahead and get a trial account, put the URL up here for you guys to go ahead and download that if you like. And secondly, there's a video that we've called a fireside chat that Sumo was gracious enough to go ahead and record with Fred Simon and Stefan Zier, both chief architects. Fred is at JFrog, Stefan is at Sumo Logic. And it's just a great way to really get a better overview from both perspectives, Sumo and JFrog, about advanced analytics through your CI/CD pipeline. So if we don't have any more questions, I appreciate everyone for being on the call today. We are going to make this webinar available to you all, so please look for that email. And thank you once again for attending today.